Hello, hello, and welcome to today's Frontiers Forum, coming to you live from a studio in Zurich, in Switzerland. Hello, I am Greg Foote. I am a science journalist. I'm a broadcaster from the UK. I'm your host for today's virtual forum. As you will have seen, the title for today's event is Nature-Based Solutions for Biodiversity and Livelihoods, Voices from the Field. We're going to journey around the globe. We're going to see how thriving natural habitats are both improving local livelihoods and addressing the twin crises of biodiversity loss and climate change. We're going to hear shortly from our guest speaker, the world-renowned ecologist Professor Tom Crowther from ETH Zurich, just down the road. Tom's then going to be joined by two other voices from the field, special guests from Kenya and India, who are going to be sharing their ecosystem restoration projects. I'm going to be joined by Sangita Sharma, the founder of Annadana Soil and Seed Savers Network, and Adrian Leitoro, the team leader at Nature and People as One. Really, really looking forward to those conversations. Unfortunately, we were also due to be joined by a third guest, Dr Laury Cullen, but he has sadly been taken ill, so he's not going to be able to join us live today. He is watching though, so I wish you a very speedy recovery, Laury, and we're going to present your work later on your behalf. For anyone new to Frontiers, hello, welcome. The Frontiers Forum is an opportunity for renowned scientists to advance science-led solutions for humanity's greatest challenges, from reversing climate change and preserving biodiversity to improving health and well-being. It aims to connect global communities across science, policy, and civil society, maximising the reach of transformational science and sparking powerful new collaborations for enabling healthy lives on a healthy planet. And Frontiers Forum is also an opportunity to connect you to these brilliant scientists. That is the plan today. Right then, let's introduce my first guest speaker. Professor Tom Crowther is an ecologist who explores the connections between biodiversity and climate change. Named a young global leader by the World Economic Forum, Tom's work on the protection and restoration of biodiversity has been internationally recognised. He is a professor in the Department of Environmental Systems Science at ETH Zurich. He's the chair of the Advisory Council for the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration and the founder of Restor, an online platform for the global restoration movement that connects and supports more than 125,000 conservation and restoration projects worldwide, something that we'll be hearing a lot more about very, very soon. Professor Crowther's landmark postdoctoral research, which was published in 2015, transformed the understanding of the world's tree cover, estimating the global number of trees at just around 3 trillion. The research also suggested that the total number of trees had declined by almost half since the agricultural revolution 12,000 years ago, and that the Earth was continuing to lose around 10 billion trees each year. In 2019, his paper on the global tree restoration potential attracted widespread attention for estimating that there was actually close to 1 billion hectares of degraded land, where more than 1 trillion new trees could grow. And that if they were protected to reach maturity, those 1 trillion trees could potentially capture 200 billion tonnes of carbon. That is a third of the amount that we need to capture to reach climate drawdown. That's when levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere stop climbing and they start to steadily decline. To hear more about that and to share some very interesting brand new research with all of us, please welcome Professor Tom Crowther. Hello, Tom.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining me in the studio. Let's get to that trillion trees figure. That made quite the impact when you announced it on kind of both sides of the scale. Talk to me about it.
Yeah, this was a pretty overwhelming moment in my life. I think the number trillion just captured everyone's imagination. It went viral to the full extent of that term. And it was very exciting. A lot of attention got brought towards nature. But unfortunately, there was also a lot of misconceptions. People thought that restoring 1 trillion trees meant planting rows and rows and rows of monocultures of trees. And that couldn't be further from the truth, because actually that would be really damaging to nature. It'd be damaging to the climate change movement. It would kill thousands of species in their wake. So the real challenge of the Trillion Trees movement was to show that actually restoring these ecosystems isn't about planting rows of nature. It's about revitalizing biodiversity for the well-being of people who depend on it. And it's only when that message started to come through that the momentum really started to build.
Yeah, the groundswell kind of started. And I mentioned that you are the chair of the Advisory Council for the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. Let's go to that then. Let's go to this landmark law. It officially came into force less than a month ago, the EU Nature Restoration Law. Tell us about it.
Yeah, this is an incredibly exciting moment in history because for the last decade or so, we've had increasing public awareness and interest in nature, and that has been followed by a lot of pledges from governments and companies, pledges to promote nature, and that's great. We like pledges, but those are just sort of promises that can happen and maybe they won't. Whereas this is the first time ever there has been a continental scale law expecting, in fact, holding governments to their pledges so that they must restore 20% of nature on those countries by 2030, and they are going to end degradation and, in fact, recover a lot of degraded land by 2050. This is now a landmark commitment that has been accepted by all the EU nations. So it is now, it's inevitably going to happen. This is real movement.
It's in law. And how was the process of developing the restoration law? Because I know a challenge with laws like this is you've got to build up an academic consensus, haven't you, to inform that policy making. How easy or how difficult was that?
Well, that's exactly it. It's all great to have an idea. I think lots of people have this idea that nature's good, but to build academic consensus behind that idea is a hell of a different challenge. It required working together with hundreds and hundreds of ecologists all across the globe, sharing insights and approaches to really build a robust understanding of that potential of nature. And it's only once we got that potential and once we got that sort of correspondence among all the scientists that the politicians could then really move forward.
Often, though, when people talk about restoring nature, there's a tension, isn't there, that arises. There's this kind of perception that you can't have both. You can't have ecological restoration and economic growth, especially in regions that depend on exploiting their natural resources, essentially. So do you believe that the EU restoration law can reconcile that perceived trade-off between ecological restoration and economic growth?
Well, you're absolutely right. I think most people do think, we either choose nature or we choose people. And that is actually quite an evolutionarily new idea. It's only in the last few hundred years that this idea of a trade-off between people and nature has ever emerged. Because throughout the dawn of our civilization, the dawn of our evolution, we've depended on nature for everything that we have ever used. Everything we've ever worn or eaten or drank or sat on came from nature. And so it's actually the backbone of our economy. It's fundamental for our economy. And there's one simple rule that takes place wherever you are on the planet. A degraded ecosystem is much less valuable to the local people than a flourishing and thriving ecosystem. And that proves that nature isn't a trade-off with the economy. It's actually fundamental for a sustainable economy.
Saying that, though, it's that economic versus ecological balance issue that is sometimes quite felt and quite strongly expressed by the public. I mean, there have been protests by people who fear that restoring big swathes of land might come at the expense of jobs and food security. How do you think that policies like the EU restoration law can better address and can alleviate those fears?
Well, I think it has to start by redefining what restoration really means. I think, again, everyone thinks of restoration as get people out of the way, restore nature. And that could not be further from the truth. And unfortunately, that is the misconception that's giving rise to a lot of concern around this landmark law. Restoration is not about kicking people out of the way. It's instead actually about empowering those people. It's about finding the farmers, finding the local communities, finding the indigenous populations who live in association with nature, and sending finances towards those people. Because when they are economically empowered, that is when nature thrives.
And that's a big thing we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking to some of these local stewards and about their projects. But along with this public perception, what are the biggest practical challenges, right? This EU restoration law says that they're going to restore 20% plus of land and sea by the year 2030. How can the people watching, how can the scientific community assist in achieving that?
So ultimately, the biggest, a decade of scientific research now shows us comprehensively that the biggest driver of degradation on our planet is global inequality. we have 1% of people with massive footprints, and then we've got billions of people living day to day, living below the poverty line, and these are often the people living most closely in association with nature. Those are the people who we need to empower with this movement. The only way we're going to turn this movement around is by driving the equitable distribution of wealth towards those local stewards of nature, towards those people living in association with land. And when they are economically empowered to be lifted out of day-to-day financing cycles, that is when they can find the sustainable options, and those sustainable options always benefit nature. So really, the big challenge is an equitable distribution of wealth.
And we are going to talk about also how kind of nature-based solutions support that as well in a second. I teased earlier that you're going to share some of the latest research coming out of your lab, the Crowther lab, in particular research that explores this impact that we're talking about, the impact of the loss of nature and biodiversity on agricultural yield, because that's a bit of the tension. Talk us through it. Come on then.
Well, you're exactly right. The big crux of this whole challenge is people say, well, we need nature, but we also need agriculture. Again, this inference of a trade-off between the two. Now, this has been a debate that has been going on for over a century. And unfortunately, it's been a debate that we haven't been able to tackle until right now. It's only recently we've developed this universal theory of nature's limits. Now, if we go back to the fundamentals of existence, the existence of a country. If you've got a forested country, for example, let's say it's entirely covered in forest, you definitely need to remove some nature, you need to remove some forest in order to have agricultural yields. Mm-hmm. But at the other end of the spectrum, once you've removed 99% of the forests, then removing the last 1% is only going to decrease your yields even more, because you'll lose soil quality, you'll lose climate regulation, you'll lose pollinators.
Let's bring up your graphic that shows this really nicely, actually. Here we go.
That sounds like a plan. Ultimately, what we have then is a curve. We've got at one end of the spectrum, removing forests increases your yields, and at the other end of the spectrum, removing forests decreases your yields. I don't know if the graph's visible there, but
I think it is up, yeah.
That means that there's a tipping point in between. There's a point at which, there's an inflection point at which, if you remove more and more forests, eventually you're going to start depleting your agricultural yields. And that is the critical thing for the sort of state that our planet is in right now.
So we should say that this is a graphic from a paper led by one of your PhD students.
That's correct, yeah.
Young Gao.
Young, yeah.
And on this it says the universal theory of nature's universal limits. So what I'd love to know is how well can this be extrapolated globally?
Well, the really thrilling thing about this is a fundamental theory, right? It has to take this sort of form with this hump, but we've never been able to see where every country on the planet is because we've never had global scale data on this topic until right now. What Gayung's done is pulled together data on agricultural yields and on forest cover from every forested country on the planet. And what is staggering is we can see, unfortunately, that about 60% of the countries have tipped beyond that tipping point. So we've removed so much forest that we're now starting to lose agricultural yields. That's all the red countries on this map. There are a few countries that are still in the blue where they've got a huge amount of nature, but unfortunately, so many of those countries have depleted forests, which means that every single hectare that they remove, they're actually reducing the yields of the agriculture in the nearby farms. And on top of that, even more concerning potentially is that most of the global south, most of the tropical regions are at that tipping point, which means they are now in a state where any more deforestation will lead to more and more and more agricultural losses. And those agricultural losses will only come with economic losses that will impact everyone in those societies.
It's fascinating to see that actually on a global map. How does identifying this sort of map, identifying these universal limits, help us create more sustainable development models? And how do you go about ensuring that you don't just focus on conservation of a specific species, say, but instead you build a more holistic view, the whole kind of ecosystem restoration?
Well, that's exactly it. The challenge here is we have to speak to policymakers at this stage, right? We need the policymakers to commit to restoring nature. We know that we need nature in order to survive on the planet, and they need the evidence that it's beneficial to their people. And now we can say, for every one of those countries that's moved beyond the tipping point, we can say exactly how much more agricultural yield you'll get for exactly how much forest. So you can say, look, restore this much land and your yields will increase this much, your economy will improve that much, and then you have the foundations for all the environmental initiatives that those countries can lead.
Something I've heard you talk about before in chats and interviews are feedback loops. So could you introduce us to what they are, especially in the context of restoring ecological balance, and also share what you believe is the most crucial feedback loop or the most crucial way to break the harmful feedback loops?
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. Feedback loops, for me, are the most fundamental thing in science, actually. I think the idea of cause and effect is often, you can think about it through the lens of feedback loops. A feedback is a process that gives rise to something that reinforces that process. So if you think about the beginnings of the universe, we've got atoms dotted around everywhere. Some of those atoms are closer together than others, which means they gain more gravity, so they pull others, which means they give more gravity, so they pull others, so they more gravity. And this is the feedback loop that gave rise to stars and the formation of all matter in the known universe. And it's feedback like this that are driving climate change. They're also driving degradation. As people are depleting ecosystems, they are needing to use more fertilizers, which depletes ecosystems further, so they need more fertilizers. And unfortunately, these feedback loops are spiraling out of our control. But for restoration to work, there is a single, simple feedback loop that we simply have to nail. And that is the positive feedback loop between ecological recovery or nature recovery and economic gains. When nature makes local people more money, that is when you cannot stop it from making more nature, which will make more money, making more nature. And that is when you can't even stop nature from recovering across landscapes because everyone's thriving.
And that's the perfect segue, because you've been collecting examples of just that, of those stories, of those projects, of those local stewards on an online platform called Restor. Tell us all about Restor.
Yeah, that is exactly it. The big challenge in global restoration is finding these heroes of nature, finding the local land stewards. And so that is why we teamed up with a lot of academics around the world, and we also teamed up with Google, who helped us along the way, to build Restor, which is, in essence, the Google Maps for nature. You don't see shops and hairdressers, you'll see conservation projects, restoration initiatives, or local farms that are bringing sustainable produce. And for the very simple act of encouraging these people to become visible on this platform has built the basis of a global bottom-up restoration movement. So for coming online, all of those people get free data about the ecology of their site and how best to manage it and how much carbon is stored there. But for us, it means they are visible and they are now at our fingertips so that we can all engage in this movement.
Yeah, and there are so many amazing projects. I had a very fun few hours looking all over Restor. Give me an example, just give me one example out of them, of how Restor helps local people on the ground.
Right, so the challenge here, as I mentioned, is it's to channel the wealth of our planet towards these local stewards of nature, right? And so I've got one lovely example. I know one farmer in Ethiopia, he's called Desta. He lives in the Kaffa region of Ethiopia, where there's huge degradation, where forests have been removed to grow coffee. But instead, Desta's doing it a little bit differently. Instead of removing the forest, he leaves the forest standing and he plants the coffee trees underneath the canopy. And that forest traps water and nutrients, so his coffee doesn't actually need fertilizers or irrigation in order to grow, which means his profits are higher than the nearby farmers. And that very simple fact means that all the nearby farmers are now allowing trees to recover on their farms so that they can have more productive coffee production. But the cool thing for Desta, by joining Restor, he gets data about how he's doing, but more importantly, he gets visibility to his customers. And that's the exciting thing for me, because those customers are now empowered. With every coffee they drink, they can choose between a Starbucks coffee or Desta's coffee, where they can see all the incredible biodiversity that's happening there. And for that reason, Desta tells me that his profits have gone up 600% because people are now repeatedly coming back to buy Desta's coffee because they know they're having a positive footprint. When you tap into people's sort of energy to have a positive impact on the world, the channels of money start to open, and that is bringing Desta so much more financial security.
Awesome. So that's Desta. You mentioned the local farmers that are kind of seeing the yields go up, so they kind of do the same thing. Can we take it up another level? Can we take it from local to national or global?
Well, actually, this is a massive moment for me because it's the first time I'm mentioning this online, but we have just completed the first ever national scale study of a project like this. Costa Rica is a very famous country in the environmental movement because 30 years ago, most of their forest had been depleted, like many of the countries in Central America. But 30 years ago, they implemented a new program called the Payment for Ecosystem Service Program. So they paid local farmers, they just distributed the flow of wealth towards local farmers across the country to bring back nature. Now, we've seen increases in forest cover and increases in carbon storage, but we've never known if that actually corresponds with improvement in ecological health. So through Restor, now that we see where all of those farmers are, we've been able to send bioacoustics monitoring recorders out there. One of my PhD students has traveled across all of Costa Rica, working with hundreds of Costa Rican students to collect the sounds of recovering nature. And what is staggering is that over those 30 years, we've recorded an 86% increase in the health of that soundscape. It is now 86% of the way towards being an intact, natural forest. That means we've got the sounds of birds and insects, but also howler monkeys and larger organisms that need huge amounts of energy and nutrients to survive. It is a flourishing, thriving ecosystem at a national scale. This is the first ever evidence of a nation turning round its biodiversity loss trend towards a biodiversity positive trend. And that is very exciting news in our world.
Hopefully publishing that soon?
That'll be coming out very soon. Don't you worry about that.
Little teaser.
Yeah.
So I'm going to bring two members of the Restor community onto the show very soon. But for people who are watching, and we've got a heck of a lot of people watching, I can tell you, how can they use the platform, use Restor, to positively impact conservation and restoration efforts around the world?
I think this is the key to Restor. We all grew up wanting to do something good for the world, but not really knowing how. How do I engage in restoration? How do I engage in conservation? For the first time ever through Restor, we now have 250,000 local indigenous-led projects or community-led farms or farmers in different regions revitalizing nature. For the first time ever, every one of them is available for free at our fingertips, which means we can now engage in the process. You can do so very simply by donating or volunteering, or you can engage in the economy of restoration, which is more exciting to me. We can start to find products that you want to buy sustainable honey, or buy sustainable coffee from Destas. And then with every single decision you make, you can start to channel the flow of wealth towards these stewards of nature rather than going in the opposite direction. And then we are all able to engage in the environmental movement.
Super. Go and have a look at Restor. Thank you very much, Tom. I'll say goodbye for now, but I'll be back with you in a second. So it's time to get some voices from the field. When we were preparing today's Frontiers Forum, we wanted to ensure that you got to meet some of the amazing people that are out there, actively working to restore nature and to empower local people to protect and sustainably manage the land. We didn't want you to just hear from these people about their successes. We also want to share their challenges with you as well, and hopefully hear their thoughts on laws and policy and research as well. So the first voice from the field that I was going to introduce today is the Director of Conservation and Science at the Brazilian Institute for Ecological Research, Dr Laury Cullen Jr, who was going to join from Sao Paulo, Brazil. But Laury, as I mentioned, is sadly unable to join us. But his amazing work deserves to be shared. So here is a quick video all about it.
The Atlantic Forest. Once an unbroken biome stretching along the eastern seaboard of South America that was at its height a quarter of the size of the Amazon. Isolated from other forests, unique ecosystems and species developed here that may be found nowhere else. For centuries, this vast biome endured catastrophic levels of clearance, such that today just 12% of the original extent remains in fragments that exist as relics of a once mighty forest. Its demise is perhaps unparalleled in the natural world. Today, scattered throughout Brazil are remnants of the Atlantic forest, isolated rafts that seem precariously in danger of vanishing altogether. But in one corner of the state of Sao Paulo, an ambitious plan has been formed. Led by the Brazilian Institute for Ecological Research, IPE, this plan envisions a landscape of interconnected forests that shelter biodiversity while coexisting in harmony with local communities that benefit from it, while helping to combat the existential threat of climate change. This is a story of that plan, the Corridors for Life, that addresses climate, communities and biodiversity.
You can find out more about Laury's Corridors for Life project and the work of the Brazilian Institute for Ecological Research, IPE, online, and we will put the link in the Zoom chat so you can go and explore that more. Let me introduce then our first voice from the field. I would like to introduce Sangita Sharma, who is going to join us from Bangalore in India. Sangita is the chairperson and the founding trustee of Annadana Soil and Seed Savers, based in Bangalore, a network dedicated to strengthening the chemical-free food movement by providing sustainable, low-cost and natural farming solutions. In 2001, Sangita moved away from being a specialist in corporate affairs to becoming a specialist in agriculture affairs. Her love for food compelled her to its source, to the seed. And that same time, she created Annadana to safeguard heirloom seeds and secure the livelihoods of farmers. The seed bank now covers thousands of heritage varieties and reskills farmers to become researchers, seed savers and educators. Sangita has been recognised as a Seed Guardian of India. She was recently awarded the Women Achievers Award 2022 by the Rotary Club of Bangalore for her unswerving commitment for the preservation and propagation of Indian native heirloom seed varieties. And her campaign, My Right to Safe Food, in 2009, contributed to a moratorium for GM crops in India. Welcome, Sangita.
Thank you, Greg, Tom, and Frontiers Forum for inviting me to share Annadana's agroecology models and regenerative agriculture across India. I'm truly delighted and honored.
Lovely to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us. Great to chat to you live as well. Congratulations on the success of Annadana. Maybe you could start by giving us a quick overview of your From Our Living Fields initiative. Let's explain its main goals and its activities.
Before I start, allow me to nail my credentials to the wall. I have no science, horticulture, nor academic qualifications in agriculture, but I'm just a passionate common sense farmer taking cues from the benevolent, mystical, and curative ways of a forest, which is my inspiration. From our Living Fields initiative, our goal is to armor farmers, to safeguard their genetic wealth, and be the custodians of their seed legacy. So how do we do this? We at Annadana follow the forest principle and sow seeds of sustainable thinking by applying ancestral wisdom with inclusive technology, one which is not corrosive. We empower farmers and invest in their youth through hands-on training on regenerative agriculture practices. More important, our knowledge exchange between us lends itself to the best practices with an ecological balance and economic growth. India's rich agricultural roots go back 11,000 years. Aham bijam annahi purna brahma. Quote our scriptures to mean I am the seed, and seed is the reflection of the cosmos. Annadana was born to this faith to mean a gift of seed and food, a movement that started 2.5 decades ago with agroecology farming as the mainstay, focusing on biodiversity conservation, sustainability, justice, environment, and health.
You've kindly prepared some slides to showcase a number of the sites that you've sustainably transformed across India. We'd love to see some of them.
We start with Annadana Bangalore. If we are seed secure, we are food secure, as demonstrated in our projects and models which you're about to see. Annadana Bangalore, which is knowledge-centric model, is a catalyst for ecological change that demonstrates seeing is believing, inspiring students, farmers, scientists, and academics from all walks to take a leap of faith with informed choices. Diversity of seasons is displayed with conservation at its heart, producing successful outcomes in regenerative agriculture. Empowered farmers and their enterprising youth who have grown with Annadana drive these operations and generate diverse streams of revenues from farm trails, workshops, internships, farm produce, knowledge exchange, farm projects. Now, knowing that we're not funded, we generate our own stream of income. We revive the dying skills in seed saving to reduce farmers' dependence on expensive, patented, denatured seeds. India is the center of origin for over 2,500 brinjal varieties, amidst others. And thousands of seed treasures are safeguarded at Annadana's low-cost seed bank, which is insulated. Operating independently, Annadana has become a unique source of information with pedagogic material and films that covers a plethora of subjects in regenerative agriculture. Next, we showcase the transformation at Buell Farms. This project started in June 2024, this year. It's an exciting food security project. As solution providers, we first started with regenerating the soil. The soil microbiome is basically the gut of all plant life. To us, soil is an expectant mother where the womb of the earth, where the seeds must be nurtured by providing her nourishing nutrients. Diversity matters. We relish diversity in our diets, so does our soil. Annadana's green manuring 9-grain techniques formula, which is rich in trace minerals, antioxidants, and vitamins and more, is time-tested, along with mulch, can burst with life. As you can see, that it can transform any soil. Everything that thrives in the womb of nature, as witnessed in the forests, follows a sustainable cycle. Planning and training is the key to success. Seed mapping is conducted to revive native seed species that are fast disappearing, and in just 3 months, such a bountiful harvest. This replicable model sets a precedent for others to follow. Next, we showcase the tsunami rehabilitation project, where the transformation of saline soils in about 500 acres. Tamil Nadu, the southern state of India, was severely impacted by the tsunami in December 2004. An extensive survey that was carried out in agriculture and livestock that was affected was conducted by the state government. The expanse of destruction of standing crops, trees, grazing lands, the loss of domestic livestock, with the intrusion of sea land 2 to 3 kilometers inland into arable fields with salinity and water logging, and the microsystems were at stake and livelihoods were at stake. So a 2-hectare farm was created to demonstrate soil regeneration, rehabilitation techniques for the purpose of training and increase the awareness of the connection between health and food. A 2-pronged approach was taken to tackle this catastrophe. A quick short-term relief for small-scale land farmers and owners and landless farmers with an immediate income by the Cash to Work program. A long-term sustainable project was also conducted, and these training programs was on land regeneration to help cope with similar catastrophes. The outcome was there to see, as the state records farmers' yields provided sufficient, generated the income which is there by connecting them to viable markets. So basically, when we actually collectively come together, there is, you can overcome any calamity and crisis. Now we showcase Annadana Western Ghats, where conservation of genetic wealth is critical for reversing any agrarian calamity. And here there was severe drought. With drought looming, the Linganmakki backwaters receded by 4 kilometers. This uphill challenge was quite daunting. Our first goal was to capture erratic rains to feed the groundwater reserves. Hundreds of pits, rainwater harvesting pits, were dug the groundwater to give back to the groundwater reserves. Existing springs were recharged, ponds created, mulched below to regenerate this barren land. With roaming cattle freely grazing, there was sufficient natural fertilizers that we were blessed with. And just within 2 years, the outcome was there to see. India's hot biodiversity spot with species fast disappearing, CELSA was founded for research and conservation of tropical native species with an upcoming seed bank. Training is provided in all ambits of regenerative agriculture, integrating food and forests from land and watershed management. We aspire to build a green army of rural youth with vocational skills to take charge of their legacy and be proud of their roots. Here, as you can see, this drought reversal, this feat was accomplished thanks to Ashok Kamath, who you just saw, and Team Annadana, who's a change maker, a solution provider, and is the managing trustee of Annadana. When collective measures are taken, like I said, reversing any calamity is just an opportunity for growth. The next one is the Bio-Resource Development Center in the Northeast. Here, a team of progressive farmers, along with horticulture officers, interned at Annadana, and this was thanks to a few quasi-government officers who trained to gain exposure and knowledge with us. Initial teething challenges we faced, so long-distance hand-holding, our visits to ensure that protocols in seed saving and soil fertility of the temperate species, soil fertility and the seed saving of the temperate species were followed. The land transformation that took place was absolutely amazing. It had us all pleasantly surprised. We have donated over 1 million seed packets across India, but more important is that this capacity building, which is in the other clusters that took place, is conducted by none other than the master trainers who trained at Annadana in the time-tested techniques, both in seed saving and soil regeneration, and thereby sharing this knowledge and distributing it and demonstrating that seeing is believing, and these clusters today are safeguarding their own varieties. We at Annadana will continue to create or revolutionize sustainable food forest models, inspire India and other nations that growing food sustainably is no rocket science. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sangita. Thanks so much for sharing all those concrete examples of on-the-ground projects, and showing how it's down exactly what Tom is saying. It's the local stewards working in their land to increase that sustainability, to do that regeneration, and to see the benefits back to the community on it. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Just a quick question on the drought reversal slides, because they were amazing to see those sliding images of kind of before and afterwards. Just share a little bit more on how long that took and how you did it. Just a few lines, if you could.
It was quite a daunting challenge, but the way Ashok reversed it, with the teams, is that all low-lying areas were identified. So we dug about 150 pits for collecting rainwater harvesting. And there were about 20 large catchment pits, which were dug to recharge the groundwater tables. So water channels were created to feed the existing springs. Small and large ponds were created. So to capture the erratic monsoons that used to happen, erratically in any case. A network of pipelines were laid out to connect all the ponds. Check dams were created to release excess water to the Linganmakki backwaters. This caused no damage to our fields. Seeing this, our surrounding farms and neighbors, and including the forest department, decided to replicate our water catchment models. Just within 3 years, we saw a remarkable change in the groundwater reserves, which earlier used to dry up by November, December, January. And now an increase in outflow even after solar-powered bore wells that ran for over 8 hours, the pressures and the quantity of water did not decrease. Collective efforts surely pays off.
As you've expanded the initiative over the years, what has been the biggest challenge that you've faced, and how have you overcome it with such success?
Many challenges we have faced over the years, Greg, but let me highlight some of the biggest challenges and how we have addressed them. Firstly, faulty policies that do not support farmers, NGOs, and sustainable initiatives like ours, with corruption at every level, leaving farmers to abandon their lands and migrate to cities as laborers. This has been quite a setback for us to convince farmers and their youth to continue farming and to not give it up. It is this perception we aim to change through our various sustainable models on the ground that generate diverse income streams, which is why Annadana's agroecology models on the ground are imperative, acting as a catalyst for ecological change. Another challenge, there is no government-led knowledge-centric models to guide farmers in sustaining their livelihoods. Again, our knowledge-centric models are a living example where progressive farmers who train and intern with us have successfully applied our time-tested techniques in their own fields and reaping their benefits. Another challenge, no political will to recognize the indigenous skills of our farmers, nor provide them with practical know-how, be it in conservation, even as basic as electrical and plumbing, that can reduce his overall input costs. At Annadana, we have broken all feudal systems by creating a microcosm of democracy where farmers' inherent skills are respected, recognized, and executed. By training the youth, you give back life skills to channel their talents, and the outcome is there to see. Well, agriculture in India is no longer considered, or rather, as a noble profession. This is one of the biggest challenges. It's the last resort to acquire a degree as a status symbol. So graduates are mainly white-collar job holders with no practical grassroots knowledge in sustainable agriculture, giving us no option to place them in our organization. Instead, we found that progressive farmers and their youth who have inherent agriculture skills are far more qualified to run our operation. This is the success of Annadana, where our second generation empowered, enterprising youth drive our centers for learning.
A question from the audience to you, if I can, because we can just squeeze one in. I've got one from Luigi Girani. Quality seeds of the appropriate genotypes of appropriate species are going to be needed for restoration. Do we have enough sources of these seeds?
Well, I think we need to create more sources, like the way when we do seed mapping, we get to the seniors of that particular village or group. And yes, to answer the question, there are seeds, but there must be seed mapping to be able to restore and revive and grow these and multiply these seeds as we've done at Annadana. So it's all about making the effort that organizations, small organizations like us, are doing it across India. So why not, and with no funding whatsoever, and being a non-profit, this is kind of something that small seed banks can be created across the globe. So this is a model that can be replicated. And like everywhere you will find indigenous seeds. The sad part is that how many of us will even safeguard that one seed? We do it.
Sangita, I've got Professor Tom Crowther in the studio with me, so I'm going to bring Tom in. Tom, this is the first time I believe that you've met Sangita, who's on the Restor platform. Is there anything you want to say? Have you got any questions or comments?
I mean, I'm just so proud. I've seen the Restor film about Sangita's project, and it's absolutely inspiring. Anyone out there has to go and see that film. It's incredible, tells the whole story in all its beauty. Sangita, I'm so honored to meet you, because it's not only your individual initiatives that have revitalized your landscape, it's also what you do is empowering so many others across the landscape to do the same thing. And that's what's so inspiring. And I guess that's what just drew me to your story. And I'm so grateful that you've joined the Restor movement so that we can tell the story ourselves.
Thank you so much, Tom. I really appreciate it. And I really love the Restor platform, because we showcase our projects in Punjab, in different parts of the country, and this is such a beautiful platform to network. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sangita. Thanks for joining us. And don't go anywhere. It's bye for now, because we'll come back to you at the end of the show with some more audience questions. So thank you so much. I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am. Let's meet our second voice from the field. Let's go straight there. I'd like to introduce Adrian Leitoro, who is going to join us from Nairobi in Kenya. Adrian is the co-founder of Nature and People as One. It's a grassroots conservation organisation working to strengthen community governance and the restoration of important dryland forests and rangelands in the Mount Marsabit National Park and Reserve in Kenya. Adrian's conservation journey began growing up in national parks, and after he co-founded Nature and People as One, his first project was facilitating community dialogues around a land-based commons approach, setting up camera traps to observe human-wildlife interactions. Adrian is currently pursuing a master's in climate change adaptation, focused specifically on nature-based solutions. He's very kindly taking some time out from that to speak to us. Welcome, Adrian. Hello.
Hello. Hi, Greg. How are you doing?
Hello, seeing you loud and clear. Good. Thank you so much for joining us. Congratulations on the success of Nature and People as One. Maybe give us a quick overview of that. Explain its main goals and activities.
All right. Thank you so much, Greg. It's great to be here. So Nature and People as One, NAPO, actually is a grassroots organization. So our work is mainly focused in the northern part of the country. The northern part of Kenya is within the Horn of Africa, and I'm sure most of you have heard about the heavy drought that has been hitting this area. And so our focus on the dryland forests of Marsabit, or the northern Kenya, was because these dryland forests play a really critical role for the communities and the people we work with who are pastoralists. So pastoralists are generally people who move around with their livestock, and they're land-based people. Our communities are land-based people. So this forest, or this dryland forest, kind of played a really critical role during this dry period, because they serve as the last resort, or as the grazing area, dry season grazing area for our communities. And so it's inextricably linked to the livelihoods and the well-being of our communities. So this was one of the reasons why we actually decided to focus on this really important ecosystems that we have in northern Kenya.
And you also have kindly prepared some slides for us, Adrian, to showcase a number of the inclusive conservation projects that you've been developing across Kenya. So over to you to share some of those with us.
So just to kick us off on Nature and People as One, the acronym actually is inspired by from a Rendile word, right? So the communities we work with are indigenous, and it's a Rendile word, which basically is every settlement within the Rendile community, the center where decisions are made, that's called the NAPO, right? And so our thinking was, in order to have the best conservation outcomes, or the best restoration outcomes, there's a need for heavy community involvement and community governance. So a lot of our community members have that lived knowledge, that lived experiences of actually managing an ecosystem. The landscapes that we have currently in the northern part of Kenya are as a direct result of the stewardship of the communities and the people who actually live in this landscape. So for us, the name Napo, actually beyond nature and people as one, which symbolizes what the work that we're trying to do, is within our community, the governance structure that allows for resource management, natural resource management, and basically protecting and maintaining these landscapes. So where we work, like I mentioned, is on the dryland forests. These are critical. They are home to the communities, but they're also home to they're really home to a lot of some of the endangered species that we have in northern Kenya. Some of these species include reticulated giraffes, gravy zebras, the African elephant. And so the ecosystems that we are currently working in have several values and several ecosystem functions for both communities and for nature and for a host of other really important reasons. So just to introduce one of our first projects, which Greg already mentioned, my first project that we did with NAPO was kind of setting up a conversation to see what are the human-wildlife interactions. And so we had to set up camera traps in the ecosystems to illustrate this is where the cows and the goats pass, but also this is where the elephant passes. And so that first project kind of set us up for the Hadda Conservation Network. The people who showed us where to put camera traps, right? Where to put all these camera traps to illustrate where the zebra passes, the elephant passes, or the giraffes pass. This was the Haddas that you see here, right? These four, they literally based on the ecological knowledge that they have. And, these guys have grown up in this landscape, right? So since they were really young, they've always been taking care of their livestock in this landscape. So no one really understands this landscape better than our Hadda Conservation Network. So these guys, what we do with them is, so we kind of work together. So we provide phones where they can go out and monitor wildlife species. So these phones, as they can't read or write, they're icon-based. The applications we use are icon-based. So whenever they see an elephant, a zebra, whatever it is they see, they take a picture which takes the GPS. The two pictures that I've attached here are actually pictures taken by them. This was not taken by me or anyone else. This was taken by them. But most importantly as well is we're not just looking at it from a wildlife perspective, right? We also kind of record the movement of fellow pastoralists across the landscape. So we were able to map out the movement in relation to the season. Where are the pastoralists moving in search of pasture, which is the healthy grazing lands, which is the healthy rangelands, but also in relation to that, how is the wildlife moving and what is the cases of human-wildlife interactions and human-wildlife conflict in that particular area. So this is purely based on it's a citizen science approach, right? It's empowering our communities to be able to map and take information about their own landscapes, and this kind of guides decisions, conservation decisions, right? Because without the data and all the information, then it's very difficult for us to also engage key stakeholders. Like, for example, because it's a national park, we have to engage the Kenya Wildlife Service, or we have to engage government bodies like the Kenya Forest Service. So this what it does is it provides that information, that critical information, to be able to allocate resources better for government, of course, but also to make decisions around some of the issues that are affecting the landscape. And so just to move on to the next, if the slides cooperate, moving on to the next. So this is just a small video of the first of Malina who one of the areas that we are, if the video plays, and this is, we're also using drones. So once they identify, then we're able to now use drones to do kind of the counting of the species, but also kind of evaluate the landscape, because you can't, as you can imagine, you can't go into such a bushy area with this much elephants around. So that will be difficult to count. Yeah, so I'll move on to the next slide and just speak about what we call our Ramat model. So our Ramat model is, what Ramat is for us is, it means within the local language. So we try as much as possible to the terms that we use, it's based on the farmer managed natural regeneration. But as you can understand, going out to our community and saying farmer managed regeneration may not have that understanding. So we always try to use local names and local find local terms that are more receptive and more acceptable to our community. So Ramat basically means the lifestyle of the people, or stewardship by our local communities. And so this basically means we have protected this landscape, so we should continue doing it in that way. And our Ramat program is, as I said, based on farmer managed natural regeneration. So as you can see in the picture on the left, we hold community restoration days where we bring together community members from different landscapes to just be able to restore our landscapes, right? And be able to have that community ownership of that land. So the components of this is the active restoration days that are held monthly, but also we have community bylaws. So we can't fence the areas that we operate in. So what helps us is these community structures that are really important, and the community bylaws. So the elders that we work with, they enforce bylaws, and it's said that this area is going to be protected. And if you make a mistake of maybe interfering with a kind of a site that has been managed and has been set aside by the community as a restoration site, then there are of course consequences based on traditional forms of enforcement, right? And then the third bit is the monitoring we do. So we actively monitor our sites through, of course, apps such as Restor, Regreening Africa. We actively, whenever we do restoration sites, this information is transferred and monitored. So the last bit is our Napo Conservation Cup. So this was purely from a perspective of a lot of young people and engaging our young people. We understand that football is really huge. I'm a huge football fan as well. And so we kind of tied football and restoration. So we have teams participating in a competition, and then each team has to set aside a specific area to be able to manage. And this, we've seen really good results in terms of the management and engaging young people in restoration, because in order to qualify for the tournament, you have to have done some environmental actions. And so during the holidays, we see a lot of young people kind of taking up this restoration actions. And just to also mention some successes and some in terms of policy. So for us, when we looked at policy, it was more related to what policy frameworks can we actually have at the local level, right? So how do we translate policy frameworks that are there to our local level? And so an example of this that we're promoting is the Participatory Forest Management Plan. The Participatory Forest Management Plan is actually an act in the country, in the Forest Management Act, and this allows for communities to own government forests, or to manage and protect government, and to actually be involved in the management of government forests. So we are currently helping the Saku Community Forest Association in the forest that we are in to be able to have a legal way of actually managing and protecting the forest. And for us, I think that's what policy, right, should be. And if you have a legal way and a legal platform for communities to actually manage their own landscapes, and that for me, I think is one of the critical things that we have. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks for sharing all that with us. Really appreciate it. Again, just really powerful and important to hear those examples from the ground, right? To hear it from yourself and the team that are doing that work. Looking to the future, Adrian, if you are still there, we've just lost your image potentially. You're there. Looking to the future, how far do you think inclusive biodiversity conservation, if we kind of call all of this that, how far can that get in combating climate change and in enhancing biodiversity?
I think we have no other way, right? This is the only way that we have, because we can't keep using the same exclusive approach that we've been using, right? Especially and there's clear evidence that these landscapes that we have now that are still left were under the stewardship of, our communities, our people, and it was working, right? Now there's a bit more challenges. Of course, climate change is there. Of course, what Professor Tom mentioned is also there. Poverty, all this there's a lot of intersectionality within this, and so we still need to embrace solutions that will further. And nature-based solutions are not a new thing, to be honest. These are solutions it's just the name, but it's a solution that was already there. It has already been practiced way longer than we know. So it's about kind of identifying those positive examples and kind of reinforcing them and seeing how they work in different contexts, but also to be careful that different contexts have different solutions, and it's not the same solutions will work in the same area or like in different areas. Yeah.
I really like that. There is no other way. And also, this is nothing new, but it's so important to highlight stories. Thank you, Adrian. Really appreciate it. Stick with us. Going to be back with you in just a few minutes' time with a bunch of questions from those people listening. So thanks again. Thanks again. Tom, this is just great. This is super interesting to hear this. I'm sure you're pretty kind of moved hearing these stories, bring them to life.
I mean, the word inspiration comes to mind, but this is the most tangible version of inspiration that I can imagine. So I remember, when I started talking about these are people who've been doing it their whole lives, and there are people all across our planet who've been doing it for generations. But I remember when we first started talking about, large-scale restoration, we need to do restoration, almost everyone was coming back to us with, yeah, you're just being hopeful, you're just being overly optimistic, you're being naive, it's ridiculous. But when you hear stories like Adrian's, you realize it's, like he said, it's not just a nice to have, it's a necessity. When I first met him, he told me the story of how drought was leading to a lot of people, particularly young people, leaving the tribes. There was not enough money, there was not enough food security, so people were having to leave. As a simple result of protecting waterholes and protecting regions where biodiversity can thrive, they were able to allow vegetation to flourish. Their cattle were then able to graze. Then the tribes were able to have more sustained income and sustained food production. Even if this didn't contribute to climate change or biodiversity loss, it still should be happening. It's just as high a priority because it's about people's livelihoods. It's about the well-being of people. And if we can have inspiring stories like that told across the entire globe, then suddenly people start to realize this isn't a nice to have. This is just fundamentally necessary for survival on our planet.
And before I bring them both back for a Q&A, they're both great examples of local project success. What I'm interested in is how can we balance global environmental policies with local conservation needs, right? And how can we ensure that local ecosystems aren't overlooked and aren't lost in this kind of bigger policy picture?
Well, this is the whole challenge with biodiversity. With climate change, we've had a lot of momentum because it's a global challenge, so global policies work. You cut emissions here, it saves the climate everywhere, whereas biodiversity is very much a local challenge. It's context dependent to the local ecology and the local people. And I think the challenge we need to overcome in getting there is to realize that this isn't something that gets solved with just big global policies. Those policies can help, but they will only work if they empower a bottom-up movement. The policymakers are not the heroes. these guys are the heroes. The people living in association with nature are the heroes. And when they find those solutions that make nature the economic preference, that is when it thrives and you can't stop it from coming back. So it's really about reframing it as this burgeoning bottom-up movement.
Let's bring them both back in. And let's put some of your questions to them, because I've had a lot of these questions in. I'm going to try to scroll through them and pick some out. So let's bring both Adrian and Sangita back into the conversation. Excellent, they're with us on the screen. Hello both. So let me try to group some of these questions together. I've been trying to shuffle them into groups. So we've had quite a few questions on the role of soil microbes. Sangita, you did mention that briefly in your presentation. I've had questions from Ashwin Ravana, Sifa Mandla, Nyambo, Diane J. Singh. Do we need to better integrate microbial functions into restoration, into nature-based solution strategies? And if so, what are the current gaps in research or implementation that need to be addressed? Sangita first and then Tom on this one. Sangita.
Well, why can't we learn from the forest principle that if the forest can regenerate herself, why not in agriculture? The microbial activity, the soil microbiome basically, as we said, is the gut of all plant life on Earth. And what we have done by promoting the NPK one-stroke fit formula, we have destroyed the fabric of sustainability. So to answer your question, yes, we need to provide the soil nourishing nutrients, and that thereby, I mean, if we relish our, diversity in our diets, why not the soil? And it's time tested that when we actually give back to the soil, automatically there is a function that the seeds of resilience that burst into life is just unbelievable. So we've been able to transform any soil, whether it is barren or drought, or for that matter, saline, as I've just shown you the presentations. Yes, you can transform anything if you systematically approach the topography with the genetic resources that are available to you in that particular region and tackle it from that front instead of bringing in extensive inputs, technological, unsustainable, corrosive inputs. And this way you can actually, regenerate or rehabilitate the soil.
Local knowledge and local resources. Thinking across Restor and thinking across the projects that you've got on there, how much are the locals thinking about soil microbes? Are the locals thinking about soil? How much can that influence research that's happening and knowledge?
I think the people on the ground fundamentally know it. Everybody knows that a healthy microbiome is essential for a healthy ecosystem. You know, we've had a revolution in our understanding of the human microbiome. Now we can tackle all sorts of diseases and challenges by promoting a healthy microbiome within ourselves, and exactly the same thing is true for our soils and our ecosystems. What's quite exciting now is we've seen from Restor, across the thousands and thousands of sites, we do realize that this microbiome might actually be one of, if not the biggest limiting factor regulating ecological recovery. So what we've seen is when people have taken samples of soil, they take the microbes from the soil and they put it in the degraded place, the recovery rates of the ecosystem are 68% faster on average. 68% faster. That is an insane increase in regeneration rates just from taking a native local microbiome, just putting a few grams of microbes into the soil from the native forest or the native ecosystem will speed up your recovery. You asked the question, like, what don't we know yet? That 68% is the average of a lot of variation. In some places it works a lot, in other places it works a little, and we're trying to understand the biogeographic variation in those effects right now.
Fascinating. And yeah, exactly what Sangita is talking about. On to my next question. Let's take this one from Lowena Trouve. Are urban biodiversity and ecosystems also relevant for mitigating the impact of climate change within cities? And let's add, Blal Adam Esmail particularly asks about such benefit to cities in Africa and the global south.
This is a question I get a lot. It is one of the most important components of ecological restoration is bringing vegetation into cities. It is absolutely critical. Cities don't take a huge amount of our land space. They're less than 1% of the global land surface. So we're not talking about global climate mitigation. But when we talk about local climate adaptation, that is when vegetation is absolutely critical. By 2050, over 75% of people are expected to live in cities. And the leading cause of climate-related mortality and morbidity is extreme heat. Vegetation in urban settings can cool down the climate by up to 10 degrees. That can be a critical difference, preventing massive scaled mortality and morbidity, particularly in the hot, dry regions of the planet, like you mentioned in Africa. This is a central part of our global restoration movement, and it also is the best way to get people engaged in the process.
And Adrian, I know a lot of your work is done in the national parks. Can you speak to this? Can you speak to kind of what's been done in cities or larger villages?
Yeah, a lot of our work is in the rural area, but to be honest, I completely agree in terms of the more bare and the more concrete we see in the cities, then also the heat, the effects on heat, the effects on, of course, the population in terms of even the diseases that are nature in terms of flooding. Because if you have nature around cities and then there's flooding, a lot of it would be absorbed. But if you have a concrete area, then that water would sit, and then there's whole problems with that. That would be kind of my thoughts on the urban perspective. Yeah.
This one to you as well, Adrian. This is from Amod Dixit, who says, should local academic and civil society organisations receive financial support for collaborative research on traditional knowledge to document nature-based solutions for biodiversity preservation and resilience to climate change? That's a long question, but an interesting one. They say, I believe it's crucial to fund master's and PhD research on indigenous practices through global institutions. I put this to you, Adrian, because you were saying, we know this. This is nothing new. But do there need to be additional incentives to kind of capture this knowledge?
I think a lot of resources need to be placed in finding the balance between the indigenous knowledge that we have, which is critical, and the scientific knowledge that we have, because then we'll be now going into that sweet spot where we have actually the solutions coming out, guided by, of course, we understand indigenous knowledge is a science in itself. So my experiences has been, we couldn't even find a lot of the, like I mentioned, just an example, the elephant corridors, we couldn't find them if we didn't have the knowledge of our communities, right? Or areas that were originally dryland season grazing areas. So you would know where to restore based on this knowledge, right? So I really do believe we need more investment and more work and more PhD and master's students being encouraged, right? Why don't we explore the other side, right, as well, to complement what knowledge we already have?
Speaking your language?
Could not agree more. It was a long question, but the answer is a resounding yes. Yeah. We need more of that.
Sangita, I've had a few questions about biodiversity and human health. There's one here from Marcella Fresno who says, how do ecosystem restoration efforts specifically contribute to reducing the risks of various human health challenges around the world? Is that part of your work as well? Obviously food, a big part of fueling the system, but are there also restoration projects that you're doing with Annadana and with local communities?
Yes, we are. The important thing, right from the beginning, when my research, I was alarmed to see that seeds are no longer the legacy of our farmers. And this unassuming gift of life called biodiversity is the fruit of the work of thousands of generations of rural farmers. And today it's under the control of a handful of seed corporations. Now, I discovered that if the soil is healthy, the seed is healthy. The seed is healthy, the plants and fruits are healthy. And the outcome is we are all healthy. So why have we reversed, or rather destroyed, a thriving ecosystem that sustained itself for over 12 millennia and producing fertilizers for less than a century? How ironical is it? We destroy it, and then this biodiversity that needs to be conserved, revived, is the foundation for sustainable living. What we eat, what we are, is what we eat. So why not, when people tell me that we can't grow food under the shade of trees, walk our farm trails and food forests and see how spices are thriving within the shade of fruit trees. Coexistence is a factor in our well-being. And for sure, we can do this even in the urban cities and allow for people to take charge of their own food. And when food is grown from the right source, which is a healing source, yeah, foods certainly heal. And that is one of the programs that we offer at Annadana, that when we grow foods, you must know its source.
Thank you, Sangita. This kind of ties back to what you were saying with Destin and also what you're saying about not having monocultures, of having different organisms living together to increase biodiversity, to increase health. Let me put this one to you. Christina Breed and others have commented that it's hard to see how the current growth and consumer economy can support sustainable living. It's essentially another one of these tensions that we were talking about earlier. We've had lots of specific questions. Could you speak on how we can best adapt global production systems to operate in a mutually beneficial relationship with the restoration of natural ecosystems? And also, how consumers can make better purchasing decisions. There are lots of questions from people saying, what can we do, right? What can we do to support supply chains that connect with those sorts of more sustainable producers?
There is so much in there. I want to talk about it for eternity.
Yeah.
But this is the crux of the entire challenge. The global economy, look, capitalism, whether you love it or hate it, it is the system we've all subscribed to, and it has done wonderful things, but it has also driven some really deleterious things, like the concept of growth for the sake of growth, like the oversimplification of our planet as we valued individual parts at the expense of the whole, like the inequitable distribution of wealth, which is, as I mentioned earlier, the biggest driver of degradation that we have. To overcome these things, we do need political decisions that drive the distribution of wealth in the opposite direction. These can be things like Costa Rica's Payment for Ecosystem Service program. They can be, they have not worked very well yet, but there are developments in nature credits and biodiversity credits and things like this, and carbon credits to even have the potential to maybe shift the flow in those directions. But there's also a whole variety of policy mechanisms that can be implemented to stop this growth for the sake of growth. The degrowth movement is not about us having less economic growth. It's not about less economic empowerment. It's about sharing the benefits and the profits of the wonders of biodiversity and the fruits of the labors of billions of people across the planet more equitably with all of us. And it's through that equitable distribution of wealth that we're going to see ecological recovery, not because we're trying to save climate change, but because, as Adrian said, it's a necessity. If climate change was never happening, if biodiversity loss was never happening, it would be just as essential to see what these guys are doing, because it's about human livelihoods doing better. And so there's definitely lots of mechanisms that we can build in to start seeing those changes.
Powerful words. Powerful words. Adrian, let me put this to you. This is from Yuri, who's an environmental scientist from Kenya. Yuri says, what kind of conflict do you face at NAPO, especially cross-border conflicts, kind of besides community bylaws? So, of these conflicts, what would you say is a major threat to your work? And how much do you have to factor that into the research?
Yeah. So the northern part of Kenya, being, like I mentioned, pastoralist communities, we move around with our livestock, and so we end up sometimes in other community areas because of drought, because of biodiversity loss. So we have to travel longer distances And this kind of puts us in that situation where there is escalating conflict, right? Because of natural resources. Of course, there are other reasons for this conflicts, but natural resource conflicts are becoming even more frequent because of this, frequent droughts, and so covering longer distances. So this is something we definitely keep in mind for when we're doing our interventions. We try as much as possible to restore the dry season grazing areas, because if these landscapes are healthy, then people are not spending time so far away, and by extension, we're also kind of not having those situations for conflict. Although this being said is easier than actually doing it, because it actually takes a lot of time, and with, of course, changing raining patterns, and it becomes a bit difficult to kind of quantify when you will be able to actually see success in that aspect. So this is definitely something that is hugely being exacerbated by climate change and biodiversity loss. And it's definitely something we are also considerate of when we're planning our interventions as well.
I mean, droughts, or any sort of effect of human-induced continued climate change, they don't care about borders, I've got interesting questions on restoration law. I'm going to try to squeeze one in before we have to wrap up. Abby Farrar asks, it's great that the EU are setting these legal targets, but will other governmental entities follow? And what will happen if countries don't reach the targets?
So yeah, there are punishments in place when countries don't reach the targets, as with any law, and that's the exciting thing. What we'd love to see, just in the same way that Costa Rica's PES program is hopefully an inspiration to other countries that can do the same thing and experience the economic growth that Costa Rica has seen as a result. We're hoping that the EU restoration law will bring benefits to local farmers, will bring benefits to the people that will then inspire other continents and countries and regions to do exactly the same thing. Now, we've got to remember that there is a massive cash flow imbalance on our planet. And so we have the global north, Europe there's a lot of financial resources available to implement such a thing. And so I think it's good that the EU should be taking a step forward and putting some money where its mouth is to actually prove that this is a sustainable option. But really, the biggest bang for our buck is going to be when we see the global north distributing the flow of wealth to the global south so that they can implement similar strategies and distribute the wealth so that the local farmers and the local indigenous people can be the ones leading this movement, because that's where the strongholds of biodiversity and carbon really are. That's where the crux of this movement is all about.
Thank you. I'm afraid we have to say goodbye to our guests. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing your projects. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Really appreciate you giving the time to join us, Adrian and Sangita. Thank you so much. And thank you all watching this so much for joining me and Tom. And I think I'm going to put one final question to you, Tom. Based on the current trajectory of research and of policy, how do you imagine that this world of biodiversity conservation and restoration, how do you think it's going to look by, say, 2040, 2050?
Look, right now, we are in a state of biodiversity loss. But we are also at a state where a lot of the trends that have led to that loss are at the forefront of our minds, both in terms of policy and societal governance. And that means that we definitely have the power to start tipping this in the other direction. The other exciting thing is now, like I said earlier, I remember being young, watching David Attenborough and dreaming of being involved but not knowing how. For the first time ever now, every single one of us has the technology and the tools to be engaged with every click of our button, with a click of a button. Everything we buy, everything we eat, everything we drink, everything we wear comes from nature. It comes from projects like Napo and from Annadana farms and the many others around the world. The future that I see in 2040 and 2050 is that we collectively have a global awakening where we recognize that we can actually change the world with every single product we buy. If we were to go on platforms like Restor and choose every product that you purchase from the shops, instead buy it from one of those guys, you're then not only avoiding a negative footprint, you have the agency to drive a positive footprint with every single purchase you make. And then I see a very bright future for our planet.
Thank you. We could chat for hours, but sadly that is all the time we've got. Thank you all for joining us for such a long time as well. Thank you, Tom, for sharing the research. Finally, a reminder and a request, really, to continue the conversation about today's session over on social media, where you can use the hashtag #FrontiersForum. And also, please do share today's event with anyone that you think would find it interesting. It's been fascinating. I've really, really enjoyed it. Thanks again to Tom, to Sangita, to Adrian, to the whole team here at Frontiers for putting this event on. I hope it has inspired you. I hope it has engaged you. And yeah, it's been absolutely wonderful. I will see you next time. Goodbye.